Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Laugesen, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is the Vice Chair for the Committee on the Present Danger China. Frank, over to you.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of our weekly webinar series sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger China, focused on the threat we face from the Chinese Communist Party, the dangers posed as a result of that threat, and what we must do if this nation is to survive the unmistakable express determination of the Xi Jinping regime to destroy the United States. We're going to be speaking today about a topic that is, hard to overstate its importance as well as its timeliness. Namely, what the Chinese Communist Party is doing, to use an old Maoist term, with magic weapons. Weapons that are not of the traditional military kind, but can be every bit as lethal and as decisive in an outcome of a conflict such as the Chinese Communist Party is waging against our country and has been for decades, unbeknownst to most Americans. This webinar series is dedicated to trying to expose that reality and to help us all appreciate, especially at this decisive moment in our nation's history, that it falls to us to take steps to try to defeat, well, yes, these magic weapons, as well as all of the others that are being wielded against us as part of the unrestricted warfare of the Chinese Communist Party, as well as the People's War that the Chinese have declared against us, a total war, a whole of society war, going back to May of 2019. The issue at the moment is, are they prepared? Are they poised? Are they willing to add shooting war to this very comprehensive threat environment? We are going to be talking about these magic weapons. We're going to be talking as well with the people who have been, I think, among our most impactful duty experts on the extent in particular to which these weapons, the whole of this program, really, by the Chinese Communist Party, is going to be demonstrated in terms of its effectiveness here inside the United States, at the hands, in some cases, of Chinese nationals, Chinese intelligence operatives and the like, yes, but also friends of China. These are folks that we've talked about, of course, in a book that was written by my colleague Dee Dee Laugesen and me, to distill the fruits of some 70 of the first of these webinars to explain who those friends are. The subtitle of the book, The Indictment, is Prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and Friends for Crimes Against America, China, and the World. So we'll be talking about those friends as well as the incredible service that they are providing to the Chinese Communist Party in its efforts to take us down. We're going to begin the conversation, as we always relish the chance to do, with one of America's, pioneers, I think, in recognizing the nature of the Chinese communist regime and warning about it tirelessly for decades. His name is Stephen Mosher. He was the first Western social scientist allowed into China back in the early 1970s. He discovered to his horror while there the true nature of the so-called one-child policy of China. It prompted him to found and lead the Population Research Institute. He has been an author and a very, very prolific essayist on the threat that we face from China. We're delighted to have him here to talk with us specifically about these magic weapons, as they're called, uh, and what the Maoist term and its current application means in today's America in terms of helping the CCP win. Steve Mosher, welcome. It's so good to have you with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you to you and Brian Kennedy and Trevor Loudon and all of the members of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, which I'm proud to count myself among. You are all doing wonderful work and playing a key role, I think, in saving the Republic from probably the greatest challenge that the United States of America has ever faced. And, you know, I say that, obviously, you can look at me and tell that I lived through the Soviet Union until its ultimate defeat. I'm not sure I will live through to see the ultimate defeat of the People's Republic of China, although I hope so. And if and when it happens, it will be in part attributable to the great work of the Committee on the Present Danger of China. So thank you all. I've followed Chinese affairs for a long time. As you know, I was been interested in China since the 1970s. I was in China in 1979. I've read all of Mao's collected works, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone who doesn't want to lose his mind. But Mao, Chairman Mao, the longtime leader of the Chinese Communist Party, liked to brag about the three magic weapons that he had used to seize power in China to win the war against Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists. And those three magic weapons, as he called them, were propaganda, united front tactics, and the People's Liberation Army. Propaganda obviously means you brainwash those you can, you intimidate or kill those you can't, all the while creating or co-opting organizations that you can use to advance the revolution. That's united front tactics. You create front organizations, all of which link up with, or controlled by, or infiltrated by and controlled through agents, support the party line. China today, interestingly enough, has 8 splinter parties that it has kept alive on life support. The Democratic Party, the Socialist Party, they still exist in China. I once walked into the offices of the Socialist Party in Guangzhou, in the city of in Guangdong province, and I saw I was walking down the street. I saw the office of the Socialist Party. I walked in. The 2 minor functionaries sitting there were appalled at the sight of a foreigner walking in and refused to answer any of my questions. I mean, it was very clear that they lived on sufferance and didn't want to have any interaction with a foreigner. They would have to later confess to their minders in the Chinese Communist Party. You know, and it turns out that I and many of our members have seen similar tactics being adopted in the United States, not just by Chinese Communist Party operatives here in our country, of which there are many, but also by the once great Democrat Party, which every generation seems to want to head pell-mell off a progressive leftist Marxist cliff and has to be reined back in by the collective voice of the American people. We saw that in 1972 with George McGovern, socialist from the Dakotas. We saw it again with Walter Mondale in 1984. We're seeing it again now, and hopefully we can drag ourselves back from that Marxist cliff one more time. But the Harris-Walz campaign are using propaganda, front organizations. They don't have anything comparable to the PLA. I mean, you look at Antifa and you look at Black Lives Matter. they weren't really effective except at burning down their own neighborhoods in cities that they already controlled. So that really wasn't very helpful, except to sow chaos, and I think that like all good Marxists, they believe with Chairman Mao that as he said, in great chaos lies great opportunity. And so they're chaos agents, and they sow chaos and confusion, create problems, and hope to profit from the turmoil that results. They're equivalent to the People's Liberation Army, I think, is lawfare that we see ongoing in the campaign against Donald Trump from the very beginning of his candidacy for presidency in 2016. So we have here in our own country, we have a kind of regime media. All the social media outside of Twitter X and Truth Social and our own broadcasts, and basically all the print media outside of the New York Post, the Washington Times, and a few other people, they're putting up a propaganda smokescreen around the Harris-Walz campaign that's really worthy of the Chinese Communist Party's People's Daily fawning coverage of Xi Jinping himself. So I see those parallels, and I find them they basically shake me to the core, because I think that our republic is closer to falling prey to these pernicious ideas than it has ever been. Mao won power through his propaganda. During the latter stages of the Chinese Civil War in the late 1940s, he suddenly declared that he was a Democrat. That he began claiming to be a great admirer of American democracy. He criticized Chiang Kai-shek as a dictator. He promised the new China would be a democracy. It was all a ploy, of course. U.S. military aid was suspended for a while. Some of Chiang's generals actually went over to Mao believing this nonsense. Once in power, of course, Mao mocked those who'd fallen for his ruse and ruled as a tyrant. And I think I see the same behavior on the part of, Tim Walz seems to have disappeared. We'll see who appears tonight on the debate or soon on the debate. But Harris, of course, has long held radical views that are being obscured from the public in the same way that Mao obscured his tyrannical views from the Chinese public during the Chinese Civil War. We have front organizations. I mean, just like the Chinese Communist Party set up splinter parties that I've already mentioned. They set up newspapers throughout nationalist China to give the appearance of widespread support. The Harris-Walz campaign has front organizations of the same kind. A couple of weeks ago, Trump received the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of Police, the nation's largest union of police officers. And suddenly, materialized out of nowhere, was a group called Police Leaders for Community Safety. Police Leaders for Community Safety, consisting of a few dozen members who praised Harris for her commitment to public safety and the rule of law. I'm originally from California. I fled California in 1995, but I remember the day when she was the California Attorney General who let hardened criminals walk free. I remember the senator who bailed out violent BLM rioters. I remember the vice president who broke the border. So much for the rule of law. And I see the Democrat Party today basically being controlled by a small cabal of Marxists, quite frankly. And I'm sad to say this, but anyone who watched the coup that was used to remove President Biden as the Democrat nominee knows that it wasn't done in anything resembling Democrat fashion. Of course, the Democrats have been moving left for a long, long time, but I believe that the Marxists have now seized control of one of America's two major parties, and they're basically using it as a cover for their Marxist policies. Tens of millions of Americans don't know this, of course. They believe the Democrat Party is still their father or their grandfather's Democrat Party. Ronald Reagan, of course, in the 1950s said, "I didn't leave the Democrat Party left me." I left the Democrat Party in the early 1980 after I realized that that communism, socialism was bad, having lived in China for a year. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. just left the Democrat Party, saying again the Democrat Party left him. He didn't leave the Democrat Party. But it's not only, the Democrat Party has not only moved left, it is now basically little more than a front organization for the Marxists who are running the show with the full-throated support of the Chinese Communist Party. It's very clear to me that all of the communist front organizations in the United States, and there are many, 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 every province has a, Hunan American committee set up in different parts of the United States. Every city, every town, lots of cities have sister city relationships with China. All of these provincial organizations, all of these national organizations are actually run by the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Department, which is, of course, part of the party apparatus that has been in existence since the very beginning of the Chinese Communist Party. I know that back in 1998, when I was working with Chris Cox on the China Commission of the time, we identified 800 different front organizations that were run by China in the United States. And the number now must be 8,000 or, God help us, tens of thousands. That's, I think, where we find ourselves today with one of our major political parties being captured by Marxists who see, and I think find inspiration in the victories that Chairman Mao himself achieved in China, victories in quotes, of course, dominating China and going on to aspire to dominate larger parts of the world. And I think in this context of Tim Walz, who said he grew up seeing posters of Mao and watching Mao celebrated in parades. Now, how can someone who grew up in a small town in western Nebraska grow up seeing posters of Chairman Mao? So obviously he went to China as a young man, predisposed to like China. And I believe that over time, he was not a victim, but a willing participant in what we call elite capture. The whole progress of his connections with China follow the standard pattern that we've seen again and again and again. It could not be nor obvious to me, a China hand of long standing, that Walz has been captured by the Chinese Communist Party. It's all there in his record. The initial approach, the flattery, the blandishments, the paid trips, the joint venture with his educational travel adventures, the academic appointment with Macau University, the paid lectures, the whole process, which is designed to bring foreigners of influence into China's orbit and keep them there in the same way kind of a planet captures a moon, has played out in Walz's career. And I wish that the Department of Homeland Security, which has confidential classified information about Tim Walz's contacts in China, probably classified for a good reason, that they would reveal to us exactly what his recent connections with China have been. I wonder what precisely is Tim Walz's relationship with his friends in the foreign ministry now, those same friends that helped him set up his educational exchange program that he profited from for many years. Are they still friends? What kind of friends? We simply don't know what sort of deals that Walz has cut with China. And I would say finally, and I'll close with this, that, thanks to the New York Post reporting on Hunter Biden's laptop back in the summer of 2020, everyone knew, and everyone has known now for 4 years, what the big guy's payoff was. And I think this knowledge helped to keep Biden's actions in check where China was concerned. I mean, I think he feared to appear weak and compromised. Well, he was weak and compromised, but the perception of being weak and compromised arguably kept him from lifting Trump's tariffs on China. Now, we simply don't know what kind of deals Walz has cut with China in the past. We do know that despite the fact that China regards the U.S. as its main enemy, its adversary, and clearly thinks that sooner or later they're going to be in a shooting war with us. Waltz continues to argue that China is not our adversary. So now that we're only a few weeks away from a presidential election that may put Tim Walz a heartbeat away from the presidency, I think we need to know all we can about his past and possible present connections with the Chinese Communist Party, the Beijing regime.
Steve Munder, thank you for this extraordinarily comprehensive introduction to both magic weapons and their use to very considerable effect in the body politic, among other elements of American society, part of the United Front Work Department and the capture of elites that it is very, very successfully been pursuing. We're going to hear more about that in a little bit from one of our other presenters, Trevor Loudon, who has been studying and writing on this subject extensively as well. But thank you, Steve. That's a very helpful introduction to the topic of the hand. We're very pleased to have someone else who has had extensive experience with Chinese communism. She is unfortunately not able to be with us in person, but I'm very pleased to say that I was able to do an interview with us, our television program on Real America's Voice called Securing America, with Xi Van Fleet. She is the author most recently of an extraordinarily insightful book, and she entitles it Mao's America, a Survivor's Warning. And I'm giving the title of this rendering of a sort of the distilled essence of this interview that aired, I believe, earlier today on Real America's Voice, The Cultural Revolution in Mao's America. And once again, a survivor's warning. Xi Van Fleet is, I hope needs no further introduction, but let me just simply say she has been remarkably courageous in warning about what's happening inside this country, notably with Loudoun County School Boards, which is where she first came to public attention. But she has become, I think, one of the most eloquent and, I think, clear-eyed of all of our colleagues in this space from firsthand experience, notably as a child in the middle of the Cultural Revolution in Communist China. So we'll go to the videotape now.
We are in a war, and it's an information war. And it is so important for American citizens, voters, to be informed before they go to the polls. But a lot of them are not informed. Why? Because they don't know history, because it's not taught. And the reason it's not taught is that it is by design. They don't want people to know the real history.
When you say they, who do you mean?
Those in control. They're not even Americans. They hate America. I would call them communist globalists. They want the same thing. They want to get rid of our freedom, not just in America, but in the entire free world. So they don't want you to know history. That's why the young people, especially the young people, know nothing about communism. If they know anything at all, they feel like they were taught it is a good thing. Communism is a system of sharing and caring. How little do they know that communism has killed more than 100 million people. And I lived through the most brutal communist regime, Mao's China. And so my book was telling people the parallels. I was about turning 7 when the Cultural Revolution started in 1966. It lasted for 10 years. So my whole youth was the Cultural Revolution. So I lived through one. I saw the devastation, the death and destruction of that Cultural Revolution. Now I'm experiencing another one in America with millions of Americans, but so many of them. I would say too many of them have no idea what's going on. They thought it's something new. They thought woke is just about, equity And they did not even know. They don't even know equity is communism. So I want to warn them. This is nothing new. Nothing is new under the sun. This is the repeat of Mao's playbook. So it is a Maoist revolution.
Yeah. The thing I so admire about you, in addition to just, your clarity and your courage and so on, is you know what you're talking about when you talk about communists or you talk about cultural Marxists. So is it hyperbole that this could lead, as you saw in your native land, to death and destruction inside
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what I said. When people know history, they know what happened and what's going to happen if you see the same thing repeating. Okay, in the Cultural Revolution, no one expect there will be death, destruction right away. We see destruction right now. You don't have to listen to me. Just go to Democrat-controlled cities. Go to San Francisco, go to Philadelphia to see the destruction, to see the devastation of the homeless and all. Okay, don't have to prove. You just go and see for yourself. But about death, it's coming. Okay, so the Cultural Revolution started in May 1966. It only took 3 months to see the first killing, the first violence. And done by whom? You would say, oh, it's a communist country. It's the police. It's the soldiers. No, it's by girls, by young girls, middle school young girls. They call themselves Red Guards, and they killed their principal, and they beat and torture and killed their principal. That was the first death. Only 3 months into that revolution, and after that, no consequence, and the violence just started to spread like wildfire. By the end of the Cultural Revolution, 20 million people lost their lives.
Xi, let me ask you, because again, this is something so fundamental to communism that it seems to not warrant even a mention, or more to the point, it does, but it doesn't get a mention, and that is the inherently violent nature of communism. That it is revolutionary.
It is revolution.
The nature of the communist
yes.
approach is violence is a necessary aspect of it, is it not?
And so Mao called his Cultural Revolution a revolution. And what is definition? Revolution is not a dinner party. It is violence. Violence. And we will see, we saw some of already, but it's coming. And this is something else that I want to remind people. What's going on in America is Maoist style communism. And so when people, and older people in the older generation, they learn a little thing about, Soviet communism. When they think about violence, they think about the secret police. And at night, knocking on your door, drag you out, and then you disappear. And then you end up in gulags or execution sites. That's not Mao's Cultural Revolution. No. Who will likely to kill you is not the police, it's not the soldiers, but possibly your neighbors, because they are so good. Mao was a master of setting up people against people. I try to get this idea out so people understand the nature of the Cultural Revolution. In Mao's Cultural Revolution, 20-some million people lost their lives. Some of them from the suppression of the army, but mostly it's neighbor kill neighbors, friends kill friends, and teachers killed by students. Why? Because it's a mass movement. That's why Mao wants to divide people, divide Chinese people by labels. And so why would these girls just overnight hate their principal so much that they want to kill her? Because she got the label. The label is from Mao. And everyone in charge of educational institution are called reactionary intellectual authority, enemy of the state. That is enough. That is enough for the girls to hate their principal so much they want to kill her. Same thing happening in America. The people are so divided, and the hatred was Unprecedented. I come here in 1986. I've never seen things like that. The only thing I can compare to is Mao's Cultural Revolution. And then when Trump twice had the assassination attempt, the people on the other side cheered because they believe violence is necessary to get rid of the enemy of the state. The same thing in the Cultural Revolution.
As you look at this, one of the questions that I know is top of people's minds is it too late for our country to reverse course, to avoid the fate, perhaps even millions of people being slaughtered by neighbors and friends? And
this is my assessment. People say, are we off the cliff? Yes, we are. We are off the cliff, but we still have a chance to fight so that we have a soft landing and not a hard crash. The situation is so dire, and we still yet to wake up so many people. I want to go back to 1949, and that was the time when the Communist Party took over China. And do you think they have no support? They have the entire country was behind them. They want communism. They choose socialism. And guess what happened? By the time they realized they were duped, it was too late. We are at that time. We have to make that choice. And that choice is between communism and America.
that's about as powerful a presentation as I've ever heard on the subject of the horrors of the Chinese Communist Party's Cultural Revolution. And of course, what makes it so chilling, so compelling, is she's talking about that happening here. And not just that it could happen, or that it might even be probable that it will happen. She's saying it's underway. And we're going to talk more with our guests who are with us in person today about her assessment and what we must do in response to it. But first, we're going to hear from Trevor Loudon. Trevor is a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China. I'm very proud of his body of work that has informed the committee in so many ways since its founding about 5 years ago. Trevor is, I call him a binational treasure, having hailed initially from New Zealand. He is now in residence here, thank God, trying to save our country from what he saw happen to his own, namely its takedown by communists. Trevor has warned tirelessly and in innumerable platforms and speeches and commentaries and presentations and podcasts and more about the enemy within. It's the title of a major book by him and film, Enemies Within the Church, another film. He has been documenting in particular the elite capture of our political class, notably in a 2-volume set entitled Security Risk Senators, and a 6-volume set, 4 of which are now available, entitled House Un-Americans. His most recent book, however, has just come out. It's entitled Stealth: Kamala Harris's Communist Roots. We've asked Trevor to talk to us about how American communists, those that are very directly tied to the Chinese Communist Party operating here, and those that are not Chinese but helping them advance their agenda, are seeking your vote for China. Trevor, welcome. It's great to have you, sir. Congratulations on the publication of your book, and we're anxious to get your thoughts on where we find ourselves in this cultural revolutionary moment and the extensive elite capture of the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, thank you so much, Frank, and thanks to Stephen and Xi before me. I agree with both of the previous correspondents. We're essentially in a Maoist revolution right now in America, and it's well underway. Now, a little bit of history, and I think Stephen will verify this. Back in the 70s, 60s, a lot of American young radicals looked to Mao Zedong for guidance. They had the radicals had previously been pro-Soviet, but by the 60s, that was boring. They were too conservative. The Maoists in Ho Chi Minh and North Korea and the Sandinistas and all of these people took the imagination of the young people. So you had Students for Democratic Society, the Weathermen, and all of these groups. And in the 80s, they coalesced into the Line of March and the Communist Workers' Party and the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and the League of Revolutionary Struggle, all of these Maoist groups operating on the campuses. But in the 1980s, as changes were happening in China, as Deng Xiaoping the initial phase of the revolution, Mao had to consolidate the revolution. Deng Xiaoping had to solve the problem of production. This is what the communists write, to produce wealth, because you can't go to socialism without going through a capitalist stage to produce the wealth. And so the American Maoists began to shift. Rather than working in cells and factories and setting up the Black Panthers and racial agitation, they started to move into the non-profits, into the legal profession, into the Democratic Party, into business. And they followed Deng's path into the productive forces of America to take more and more and more control. And we are basically run now by that generation. Those 60s and 70s Maoists are now running Hollywood. They're running the AFL-CIO, hence the big strikes we have now on the coast. They've been predicting those for months. This is pro-Chinese unions creating havoc as deliberately to the advantage of China and the detriment of our country. So at the same time, we've seen a massive development of Maoist propaganda. And if anybody's lived through, I'll give two examples of this. What was it? Mao had the concept, the mass line. There would be a line set by the Communist Party of China, and everybody must conform to this mass line. And if you did not conform to the mass line, you would be ostracized, punished, even killed. Now, I think at one stage, and Stephen may correct me on this, at one stage, everybody in China had to go and kill 10 flies every day, or, ridiculous things like this, because there was too many flies, so everybody had to kill 10 flies. And if you only got 8, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. Well, what did we see through COVID? We saw directives coming down through the Chinese Communist Party directed to the World Health Organization, which is completely controlled by the Chinese puppet Tedros and the other Chinese puppet Susan Mickey, the head of the compliance division, that there was only going to be one way of dealing with COVID. It was going to be lockdowns, vaccines, and masks. That was it. What happened to you if you chose something like maybe vitamin D therapy, or you talked about herd immunity, or you're a medical professional who suggested some other alternative treatment? You were subject to the mass line. You were persecuted, hounded, ridiculed, fired, whatever. We lived for 2.5 years through Chinese directed mass line politics. And all of the states in the Union that had the harshest lockdowns, like California, Washington, etc., they are the states with the most Chinese influence. The communist-controlled unions shut down the businesses and the schools, and the compliant politicians just did everything they could to wreck the economy. Another Maoist operation was, of course, Black Lives Matter. That was run by the Liberation Road Communist group, a direct descendant of the Maoist groups of the 1980s. All the 3 founders of Black Lives Matter were Maoists connected to this group. And it became so that you had to support Black Lives Matter. And if you didn't support Black Lives Matter, you might find your life very difficult for you if you worked in a big corporation or a government department or a school. That was mass line enforcement. And the same time we saw, exactly as we saw in the Cultural Revolution, we saw the statues being torn down. We saw the public buildings being renamed. We saw the olds, the traditions, the culture in the South being wiped out. Because as Mao and Pol Pot both knew, in order to bring about the new man, you had to destroy the old culture. You had to destroy the four olds, the things that were holding back human progress. So we've had Maoist influence in a massive scale in America for many, many years. We just don't recognize it as such. We don't recognize that the open borders movement is Maoist. We don't recognize the transgender movement is promoted by Maoists. We don't recognize that the destruction of the US military is instigated by Maoists. And hate speech legislation, all these attacks on our constitutional rights. We don't realize the attacks on the energy industry is conducted by Maoist-controlled organizations like the Natural Resources Defense Council, for instance. We do not see, because we are not allowed to see, we're not allowed to focus on the fact that China is massively influencing our society. And the other thing, the main manifestation of Maoism came in the 80s with Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition. That was, Jesse Jackson used race, a combination of races to achieve a political majority. Maoism is very race focused. Soviet communism was more class focused. Maoism was a bit more race focused because Mao didn't have an industrial working class to work with in China. You know, he had ethnic minorities. He had this kind of peasants. So when you see Black Lives Matter, the Black Panthers, the Black reparations movement, this is all Maoism. This is all driven by American Maoists. And the Rainbow Coalition got Jesse Jackson second in the Democratic primary in 1988. But in those days, minorities were a much smaller percentage of the population. The same Maoists that got Jesse Jackson to where he was were the same Maoists, some of them who had married into considerable amounts of money, were the people who got Barack Obama ahead of Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary of 2008, running on Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition strategy. Now, the Rainbow Coalition strategy is basically a Maoist strategy to use ethnic minorities across America to create racial division, but also to create majority coalitions to win elections, particularly in southern states. The goal of the Maoists, they call the South the new Confederacy. The goal of the Maoists is to unite the minorities in the South to run progressive candidates of color and win elections. This is a strategy the Maoists have used to flip Virginia, to almost flip North Carolina, to flip Georgia, to almost flip Arizona. And they're going into the southern states to spread this Rainbow Coalition strategy. Stacey Abrams is part of this movement. Andrew Gillum, who almost became the governor of Florida, is part of this movement. And it is led by a man called Steve Phillips, who used to be part of the League of Revolutionary Struggle, who married into a very wealthy family. He had access to $2 billion. It was his money that got behind Barack Obama early on. And it is his money that elected the sister of his Stanford University comrade, Maya Harris, who elected that woman's sister, Kamala Harris, to DA in California, a DA in San Francisco, Attorney General in California, and U.S. Senator from California, and now has put her on the ticket. Kamala Harris's parents were both Marxists. They were part of the group that set up the Black Panther Party, a Maoist group. She has worked with Maoists her entire political career. She has never been anything but a Maoist, which is why her brother-in-law and Eric Holder, two radicals, chose Tim Walz to be on a ticket, when Josh Shapiro would have made more electoral sense. But Tim Walz came out of the same Maoist movement, the Minnesota branch of the same Maoist movement that Kamala Harris comes out of in California. So there's a real tie-up there. And I'll just talk about, Stephen talked about, lawfare. The legal profession is absolutely penetrated by Maoists. Two leading Maoists worked for Justice Bader Ginsburg and Stephen Breyer on the Supreme Court, both friends of Stanford friends of Stephen Phillips. But Kamala Harris herself played a very strong role in electing a man called Goodwin Liu to the California Supreme Court. Goodwin Liu is a Stanford University Maoist. Steve Phillips and Kamala Harris got this man elected when he couldn't get through the U.S. Senate to serve on the Ninth Circuit. Even the left-wing Ninth Circuit, he couldn't get onto that. Kamala Harris got him that job. She also played a very strong role in getting Rob Bonta as the current Attorney General of California. Rob Bonta is the son of Filipino Maoists. His mother was Cynthia Bonta of the KMU, the pro-Communist Party of the Philippines, Maoist group working through the Line of March in the 1980s. Kamala Harris passed that job on to Rob Bonta. He took her position. They worked together for years. Everywhere you look with Kamala Harris, it's Black Lives Matter, it's Maoist groups, the Chinese Progressive Association of San Francisco runs all these Maoist-run voter registration organizations all across the country, especially in the 7 key swing states. They claim they won it for Biden-Harris in 2020, and they're working overtime for Biden-Walz this cycle. So there's the propaganda, this follows the Maoist pattern. Where, as Stephen said, we've got the propaganda, we've got the lawfare, we've got the Maoist parties both on the ground and in our business community, all working to install a Maoist team in the United States, in the White House this time around.
Got it. Thank you. And as ever, you have been incredibly detailed in the documentation that you are bringing in the way of charges here. And it's, chilling, but it's something that cannot be ignored. And we appreciate you taking the time to put together your new book and taking your time to present it to us just now. Stick around. We're going to have some questions for you in a moment. But before we do, I'm very pleased always to be able to turn over the program to our chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, Brian Kennedy, well known certainly to this audience and to the War Room and others who are paying attention to these sorts of challenges. Brian is the president of the American Strategy Group these days. He formerly and for many years led the highly acclaimed Claremont Institute. He has been an essayist and author and just a driving force, notably through the Claremont Review of Books, in which he is still the publisher. And we are always privileged to have him with us to summarize, if he can, and synthesize and illuminate the way forward in concluding this program. Specifically by talking, if you would, Brian, about how do we assure that the kind of information that has just been presented is actually available to inform an electorate about the Chinese Communist Party threat. And I'm asking this question, I should have said it at the outset, in the run-up to a debate this evening between Tim Walz, of whom we've been hearing much, and J.D. Vance, his Republican rival, the only vice presidential debate that is scheduled, and an opportunity, we hope, to educate people about, among other things, the CCP threat. Over to you, Brian.
Well, thank you, Frank. I think there couldn't be anything more important than this subject we're addressing here today. Let me first say I've known Stephen Mosher for now going on 35 years, if you can believe it. We met in 1989. We were both at the Claremont Institute back then, and I was extremely impressed by Steve back then, because here was an academic who had gone to communist China, and if he had only given them his blessing, he would today be among the most powerful, sought-after speakers in the country when it comes to China. Instead, unlike Tim Walz, when Steve went to China, he saw the evils of communism and wrote about it brilliantly and spoke about it all these years. And I can't tell you how proud I am of him and how important his writings are today, especially this essay from which we've taken this webinar off as a starting point. When I read it, I thought, yes, typical Mosher brilliance. And I'm very much glad that Steve is in the middle of this fight, and so powerfully so. So let me say a few things, and then we can have a broad discussion. I almost out of duty felt like I should give some of my time to Trevor to keep on talking, but maybe we can do that in the Q&A. I've learned so much from Trevor over the years about how to think about these communist penetration of the United States. My deep concern, of course, is we know the Maoists are operating on the left and have been for a century, let's just say. The problem in part is that conservatives don't adequately understand the seriousness of this. And that's really, Frank, why we've had these webinars, why we have the Committee on the Present Danger China, to really to explain to all Americans, of course, but also conservatives, that in fact, this is a problem, that communism, the way we saw in the Soviet Union, was not bound to fail. It required the courage and conviction of Ronald Reagan and the conservative movement at the time to drive the Soviet Union into the ground. We have to remember, of course, that even though we, quote unquote, won the Cold War, no victory is permanent. No defeat is permanent. We've been talking about this in our seminars around the country, that even though we defeat the Soviet Union reorganizes. Russia and all of its constituent parts are still a threat to the free world. They are today in a strategic alliance with Communist China against the United States. In the backdrop of that, for most of the last 30 years, we have done a completely inadequate job in understanding the threat from the communist world to the United States. We believed, as we've talked about before on these webinars, that somehow Russia would become more like the West, and certainly Communist China would have become like the West. They would have valued money the way we value money. Well, that didn't happen. They've continued with a kind of mercantilism, a kind of fascism within their own country that is organized by a communist superstructure in the Chinese Communist Party that has made Communist China a very powerful nation, maybe the most powerful nation on earth. They have money, they have a large military, and they have penetrated the United States in ways that, as Trevor and Steve have articulated, could mean our destruction. And so if we're asking the viewers to walk away with one idea, is that if we do not wake up now, we will lose this country. And so in this, run up to the election, I'm sure a lot of folks tonight are going to watch the debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. Walz is, as Steve has said, is someone who either ideologically or just in the course of things has embraced Communist China. Either he agrees with them intellectually and ideologically, and there are many Americans, unfortunately, within, among our elites, let's just say, not the American people, but among the elites, who certainly agree with communism, such as the corruption of our education system, the way G. Van Fleet described. But Waltz could also believe that, well, communist China is eventually going to win. They've certainly conditioned him to believe such things. And so he's just going to early on take their side and be a traitor, as it were, and embrace communist China now while there's not a clear winner, believing then that in the end they're going to win. I think there could also be a subtle appeal to communist China also, that they might want to weigh in on behalf of Kamala Harris and Tim Waltz in this upcoming election. I've written an essay for the Claremont Institute where I describe how communist China could put their thumb on the scale, both through contributions in this country and also through actual outright election fraud, which they are certainly capable of doing. That should be of concern to all Americans. But let me just say, I don't want anybody watching this to believe that our fate is somehow sealed here. The American people are still a good, decent people who understand human freedom, which is why, in my own judgment, the polls do not adequately reflect the support President Trump has. I think the controlled media that Steve described really goes out of their way to make up these polls, to oversample certain kind of voters, to make it look like Kamala Harris is winning, when in fact, in the kind of polls that I'm looking at, President Trump is winning. And so trust no one, as we've often said. Use your common sense. Try to understand these things. Let me finally say that in that same spirit, Frank and myself and Trevor and other members of the committee have gone around the country over the last several months in our World War III, the early years series of conferences that we've done with the American Freedom Alliance. We just did one in Milwaukee. We're going to be doing one in Pennsylvania, in Allentown, Pennsylvania, on October 19th. I hope if anybody is interested in joining in person this group of folks, they go to AmericanFreedomAlliance.org so that they can learn more about that. They've been great events, and at those events, I get nothing but inspiration from all the Americans we talk to. They still love the country. They believe in it. And if I can gently contradict Xi Van Fleet, we're not going to go kill our neighbors. That's not who we are. We're freedom-loving people who believe in God and the goodness of this country. And I don't care how radical our elites become. That's the reason we have Donald Trump on the verge of becoming president again today. The American people look at the radicalism, they see the Maoism, even if they don't quite understand it that way, and they rebel from it, which is why they embrace the America First movement. They see that there's something better going on here. They want to know about it. It's our job to tell them about it, to make sure they tell their friends and neighbors about it, and that we spread the good word of human freedom and the blessing given to us by our Creator here in this country. If we harness that again, all is well. If we reject that, then there'll be cause for despair. But for right now, I'd say there's a lot of reasons to have cause for hope, because the American people are waking up to all of this. These webinars are seen by, a lot of people. They're talked about by a lot of people. The War Room receives quite literally millions of people understanding these things and fighting for these things. And I think our best days are ahead. We just can't give in to the kind of despair the Maoists would like us to believe in. The main Maoist, mass line is that it's inevitable that communist China is going to win. That is demonstrably false. And it's the task of this committee and all the people on this webinar today to make that so. So thank you, Frank, for organizing this, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Splendid. Brian, thank you. And your leadership throughout this 5 years has been exemplary, as well as your inspiration on so many of these webinars. There's a lot to talk about that has been said here. This is obviously a very fraught moment. I think it's fair to say. Each of you have, in your own ways, described a perilous situation for a country that was founded to protect and expand individual liberty at a time when there are clearly many inside our country as well as outside it that seeks to institute something very different indeed. And Steve Moser, I've talked with you in these programs in the past about it. I don't think any of us have addressed it specifically, but I did want to ask you, because I know you've given a lot of thought. One of the facets of the warfare that has been waged against our country, one of the issues that I believe is of surpassing importance in this election season, and very much related to the one we've been discussing here today, of course, namely communism, is this idea that world government is to be preferred over the one I just described, ours, our constitutional republic. Talk a little bit about the lengths to which the CCP has gone over decades to weaponize international institutions to help advance its agenda of supplanting and ultimately destroying this country in favor of if you will, a world government with, as Xi Jinping would like to say, a sort of Chinese characteristics.
Well, that's a very, very important question, Frank, and it goes back to the question of the United Front Work Department of the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to infiltrate and subvert and ultimately to control international institutions. The ones that they don't set up as front organizations from the beginning, they try to penetrate, infiltrate, control from within existing organizations. And to that end, they've been very, very active in all international organizations, from the World Court in The Hague to the United Nations, of course, has been a prime target. All of the UN agencies, specifically the World Health Organization, but others as well, all have agents of the Chinese Communist Party who have been placed there to advance socialism with Chinese characteristics, which is the official ideology of the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, we all know that only China can perfectly practice socialism with Chinese characteristics. So that ideology would mean that we would all be under rule from Beijing if they were to succeed in controlling these institutions. In the UN, for example, the United Nations has the Chinese Communist Party has taken full advantage of the United Nations program, a young executive program. In a way, the United States, and I don't think other countries have, to implant junior executives within the UN structure who over time, and we're talking about long time horizons here, not just years, but decades, over time are promoted through the bureaucracy to very, very senior positions, so that while the heads of some of these agencies and departments of the UN may come and go and are politically appointed and tend to rotate between different continents and different centers of power, the senior secretaries in many of these UN departments are from China and do China's bidding. And if you are one of those agents, of the Chinese Communist Party, and that you happen to stray from the party line once you are ensconced in Zurich, or once you're ensconced at the UN headquarters in New York, then you will be summoned back to China. And and punished. That has happened to several of the senior executives who spent a lot of time overseas and may have been infected with ideas about human rights and democracy. And the other thing about these agents is that family members are always, in effect, held hostage, gently, of course, in China for their good behavior. So the penetration is deep, it's ongoing, and it's only going to get deeper over time. So whatever utility the UN had back in the late 1940s when it was set up, and when it was dominated by democracies in Europe, North America, and even in South America, that utility, in my view, is long gone. And I would be happy, as a friend of mine once said, to stand on the pier in New York and watch the UN set sail for Geneva. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but if we want to protect our national sovereignty, our independence, perhaps it should.
Yeah, just a quick word on specifically the United Nations in New York. As you may be aware, Steve, just last week at a so-called Summit of the Future on the margins of the UN General Assembly's annual meetings, they adopted a new pact for the future that is giving the guy who for 6 years was the president of the Socialist International, the Secretary General of the United Nations, a new set of powers to reckon with so-called complex global shocks in a way that is very explicitly designed to advance world government to the benefit, I think, of its principal prime mover, namely the Chinese Communist Party, of course. Trevor, you've made, as I mentioned earlier, your life's work rooting out and exposing this phenomenon of enemies within. I wanted to ask you about a early, and it seems to me, epic victory of the communists in America, namely the defeat, as I understand it, by Joseph Stalin of Senator Joe McCarthy, who in the late 40s, early 50s had emerged as a man who was warning assiduously about the presence of communists in our government, and was essentially transformed into an object of ridicule and essentially marginalized to the point where, to this very day, if you raise the kind of concerns that you have and so well and so authoritatively, you are often derided as being a McCarthyite, a man who is, seeing communists under every bed. Could you speak to the persistent legacy of that political warfare victory for old Uncle Joe, as they called him, not McCarthy, Stalin, and the extent to which it has made the work you're about so difficult, and your thoughts about what, besides obviously your best efforts, we can do to try to overcome this idea that somehow there just can't possibly be enemies within the United States of America.
Sure, and thank you. And I just want to just briefly mention too, it's a very nice to be on the show with Stephen, because I was given Stephen's first book back in New Zealand in the 80s, and that was what's got me studying Maoism. So that was 40 odd years ago. So it's just nice to cool. So thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I remember it, given it to me. I've still have it in New Zealand, actually. But McCarthy, I had a friend who was in the Australian Communist Party for many years. He was expelled about 1961. He became a conservative. And I asked him, I said, in the Australian Communist Party, what did you guys think of McCarthy? And he said, we were scared of him. We were terrified of him, but he didn't go anywhere near far enough. That was from Australia. So McCarthy is a sort of a grab bag for any effort to root out communism. You know, the House Un-American Activities Committee was set up bipartisan. It was a Democrat and Republican thing to go after, set up in the late 30s to go after the Klan, the Nazis, and the communists. And they pretty much eliminated the Klan and the Nazis, but the communists took a little longer. They were much more entrenched. You saw a massive demonization of McCarthy, and it is personal flaws that made him vulnerable, but especially when he started going after high-ranking military officers and certain people that were regarded as untouchable. But it wasn't just McCarthy. You know, the Senate would hold regular hearings, the Congress would hold hearings, the California legislature, the Louisiana legislature, North Carolina, there were hearings investigating communism all over the country. And I've read many of these hearings. They were conducted extremely fairly. Everybody had counsel. Everybody had the right to refuse to answer questions. And I never saw one instance of anybody that was wrongly accused of anything. If anything, they were given more latitude than they deserved, generally speaking. These hearings were very, very fair. But the pages of the Communist Party newspaper came up with the slogan McCarthyism. And that slogan was used to shut down anybody who dared to stand against communism. The greatest threat to America at the time was communism. The communists were invading the world. They were, you know, we'd identified many spies working for them. The Rosenbergs had sold our atomic secrets. Oppenheimer had betrayed the country, and don't believe the Oppenheimer movie. He was dirty as could be. So, but this, you know, sticks and stones may break my bones. You know, we see this today, Islamophobia. You cannot criticize jihadis because you're an Islamophobe. You cannot criticize the radical gay agenda because you're a homophobe. You cannot even criticize Black Lives Matter, a Maoist terrorist organization, because you're a racist. This is communism. This is you name a movement you don't like, and you demonize that movement, and you attach everybody you don't like to that movement. Right now, Republicans and conservatives are being attached to the fascist idea, to the Nazi idea. You know, President Trump, the former president of the United States, who doesn't have a racist bone in his body, is a fascist to half the country. So that legacy still remains, that cowardice. And we saw this when Michelle Bachmann tried to, the congresswoman from Minnesota, who tried to expose some of the radical Islamists operating in our system. It wasn't just the Democrats who went after her, it was leading Republicans who went after her. So this idea that the richest, most powerful country in the whole world that has a very open system and very lax security procedures, no loyalty oaths, no security checks for congressmen and senators, the idea that this country would not be targeted for penetration by China and Iran and Cuba and other similar nations is absolutely laughable. Of course we are. We've had identified big Iranian rings still operating in the Department of Defense. We just had a senior diplomat spying for Cuba for 40 years. We've had massive Chinese penetration of our systems. So what I say the next president should do, set up a new intelligence agency all about penetrating, all about getting rid of foreign penetration, then actually declare an amnesty for every traitor in America, every foreign agent, every Chinese agent, everybody who's been bought off by China. You've got 3 months to leave the country if you're a foreigner. You've got 3 months to turn yourself in if you're not. Spill your guts, tell us everything you know, tell us who paid you, what you've done, and you will escape prosecution if you expose the networks that you were part of. I think that is the merciful and Christian way of going forward and cleaning this out. And to heck with the label of McCarthyism. I stood at McCarthy's grave in Appleton, Wisconsin, and proudly had my photograph taken at that grave. And it's on my Facebook page if anybody wants to see it. He's a very much ridiculed hero, just as was Ronald Reagan, just as was J. Edgar Hoover. And we've got to get past this being scared of names and deal with the real enemies. Imagine fighting World War II if we weren't allowed to name Nazis.
Ronald Reagan was just called to mind. And I think one of the things that we've had as a very important element of the work of the Committee on the Present Danger from its founding has been the necessity, really, of replicating what Reagan did to effect a vital strategic course correction for the country. He did it in the 1980 election. He sought a mandate for that decision not to simply try to appease. The fancy French term for it at the time was détente, but appease was the policy of the day. Not even to contain the Soviet Union. He made it his purpose and went to the public saying, I believe we must put them on the ash heap of history. We must stand for the freedom of the people of the evil empire and help effect their liberation. At the time, I was a kid pretty much, but I can tell you it was widely regarded as a mission impossible. But God love him. He sought that mandate, he got that mandate, and he executed that strategy with the help of some of our good friends. I want to ask you, Brian, as a man who studies these matters closely, as an intellectual, as a historian, at this very juncture, when we are talking about the future of the United States in such, epic terms, we're having a conversation about a lot of things, but this is not one of them. There has not been a evident appeal to the American people for a course correction on China. I'm prayerful that will be part of the conversation tonight. We'll see. But I'd ask you to talk a little bit about, how important it is that with everything that we've laid on the table here, and somebody, expressed in the Q&A a little peevishness about the fact that they're only just hearing about this just now. Well, I apologize for your only coming to this at this late date, sir, but I believe that there's been plenty of evidence presented by this committee over the past, particularly the past 2 years or so that we've been doing these webinars, but in the body of work from the previous 3 years as well, putting everybody on notice as to what is going on here, what the stakes are, and the urgent necessity of that corrective action. So I ask you to talk, if you would, a little bit about the need for it, Brian, the need for the American people to be told about it in this election season, to make it a defining issue, to give a mandate, I pray to God, for bringing down the Chinese Communist Party, just as Ronald Reagan put in motion the takedown of the Soviet one. And if you could also, Brian, just talk a little bit, and thank you for mentioning Karen Sigeman's wonderful programs of which we've both been party. And I could only strongly second, please, if you have not joined us for any of the previous 4, come to Allentown, Pennsylvania on the 19th of October. Sign up with the American Freedom Alliance. It's going to be a very, very good program, and you have a need to know. And it's an opportunity to interact personally with us, which we also relish. But Brian, I just wanted to close by asking you to tie into the importance of the task of defeating the Chinese Communist Party before it has its way with us. Not just the soft landing of which Xi spoke, but prayerfully I ask, that we be delivered from all of this and in fact prevail. But we have a moment in which the Chinese, as it happens, are in very difficult circumstances. Speak about that, if you would, and why it makes it all the more essential that we seek nothing less than victory.
Reagan was operating in a country that was radically healthier than the United States is today. Let's say the American academic class, even though it had always been corrupted by communists or socialists or Marxists, what have you, it was still in a better position than the one we have today. The elites in America are the ones who are so corrupt. Some of them have been captured directly by the Chinese Communist Party, but others cannot think clearly about nearly anything. And so we have much less of a wellspring today to draw from than Reagan did at the time. So the country is in a much more precarious spot, just given the corruption of the elites. Now, the American people, I think, have always understood that there were enemies abroad that meant us harm. And when you look at communist China, they present a very unique challenge to this country. We've described it. I don't need to repeat all of that, but they're so embedded today in American society that President Trump, when he's campaigning, or any politician when they're campaigning, have to measure exactly what kind of audience they're speaking to. Is it an audience of just citizens, or are there business people? The business people tend to be corrupted as well by our relations with communist China. And so the Chinese know that as I often say on these webinars, they spend $16 billion a year in intelligence and influence operations. They've done that for many, many years. They have gotten a foothold in America among American elites. And so the task of articulating what that looks like in any given presentation has to be, I think, modulated, let's just say, so that you know who you're talking to. If you're talking to the American people, and that's mostly what President Trump does, he can be a full-throated critic of communist China. And he sees in them, what they are. They are communists. When it comes to, the business groups he speaks to, he has to moderate that tone, or immediately people, are repelled by it. Such is the level of corruption. I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to win on a number of fronts. Yes, we're going to have to articulate just what communist China is about and the threat they mean to this country. But a lot of what this fall's campaign is about, and I say this as someone who runs a nonprofit, so these are my own personal views, of course. A lot of what this fall's campaign is about is just common sense. Do you open your borders and have millions, maybe 20 million people come across the border, including maybe 100,000 communist Chinese, special forces operatives come across your border? Does anybody think that's a good idea? And so President Trump doesn't articulate necessarily communist China at any given moment. He'll just tell that story, and he's trying to make an appeal to the common sense of the American people, which is one reason why I think he is quite likely to win, even though there are many, many forces against him. That just at the level of common sense, left or right, or, Democrat, Republican in American politics, there used to be unanimity that we're not going to just open the borders to our enemies. We're living in a country today where we've opened the borders to our enemies. Communist China. President Trump will articulate just what communist China means to this country, but he's also doing it in a backdrop of a failure of U.S. deterrence. Witness, just today, the attack by Iran on Israel. in the missiles they have launched at Israel. And there'll be, of course, some retaliation, we would expect in the next few days. But would Iran have done that without the backing of Communist China? No. Communist China is backing the play of Iran in attacking Israel. And so the failure of U.S. deterrence should be laid directly at the feet of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their complicity, not merely with the Iranians in their funding of Iran, but also in their support of Chinese policy, which they have continued to do. And so let us hope over the next several weeks, the next month really, that both J.D. Vance and Tim Walz have a real debate about that and see what happens. And let us pray that President Trump can articulate to the best of his abilities what is really at risk here. And let Kamala Harris, if she would like, defend their policies when it comes to Iran and Communist China, because those policies are on the verge of leading us to destruction. And we as Americans have to pray that we do not let that continue. Thank you, Frank.
I can only say amen to that prayer, Brian. Thank you. Let me just, if I may, conclude with the observation that I was pressing on you, Brian, and that is, we talk in these programs a lot about the various capabilities that the Chinese use to advance their agenda. Magic weapons being just, the example du jour. But we sometimes probably don't adequately underscore the kinds of difficulties that are operating inside China now, increasingly, I think, afflicting Xi, his political situation, certainly his economic and financial one, the demographic challenges and so on. As Steve Mosher can speak to that better than anybody. I'm of the view, and we will continue to work at trying to ensure that part of the story is told as well, that's a good news, bad news, feature of what we're talking about here. Good news that it is afflicting Xi. Bad news is that affliction may further induce him to think that he needs to do what totalitarians often do, which is to act aggressively to relieve the pressure internally. Our object, it seems to me, should be to intensify that pressure, to help bring about a situation in which the people of China take matters into their own hands, vis-a-vis this outfit that has, as Steve said at the very beginning of the program, done such horrific things. Xi and fleet as well. And it wasn't just the Cultural Revolution. I think Steve's number is 100 million or so, well more than the 20 million of the Cultural Revolutionary era. But the point is that we have things we can do about this. One of the most important, we think, is to stop funding the Chinese Communist Party. We've been talking about this from the inception of the Committee on the Present Danger China, and we will continue to do so as part of, I hope, a campaign that will be mounted in earnest this fall. We call it the Defund the Enemy campaign, inspired in no small measure by people like our friend Roger Robinson and Maria Bartiromo and the excellent special that they did recently entitled Underwriting the Enemy. So all of this is an important opportunity, I believe, for us to do something besides just try to stave off what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to us, with help from their friends, yes, inside this country. And I also just wanted to close by underscoring something that Brian said in passing. I should have said it at the beginning. I apologize for not doing so. Each of us, to varying degrees, have political views. They are our own. They're not the committee's. The committee is not sponsoring those views in any way. We are presenting information, factual information, that informs those individuals' views. And I'm very pleased that we have such extraordinary, thoughtful, and articulate experts who have shared them with us today. We want to make sure that you not only have had a chance to take all of this information aboard, it will be posted shortly, thanks to our wonderful colleague, Oleg Bashian, at Committee on the Present Danger site, presentdangerchina.org. But we just plead with you. Make sure that people you know, make sure that people you love, most especially, but people that you work with, people that you are neighbors with, are equipped with this information as well. They too have a need to know. And if you've taken nothing else away from this conversation, the hour is extraordinarily late. Whether you agree that we are in the midst of a cultural revolution, whether you think that may be a little over the top, that the Chinese Communist Party is fully at war with us or about to go to maybe a full-on war, these are all things that individuals need to study and come to their own informed conclusion about, and then vote. It could not be more important. And I pray that what we'll find tonight and in the remaining days of this campaign is that there will be a proper focus at the national political level on this very issue. As Van Fleet put it, communism or America, and that we will make the right choice. God's grace and prevail. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to my dear friend Didi Logison, and my heartfelt thanks to each of our wonderful presenters, Steve Mosher, G. Van Fleet, Trevor Loudon, Brian Kennedy, and of course Didi and Oleg, who make all this possible. I'm fond of saying go forth and multiply, and I mean it now more than ever. Please do so. God bless you.
Thank you, Frank. You can find a video of this program at presentdangerchina.org within a day of the conclusion of our program. Please share this and our other programs with those who represent you or want to represent you, and to your colleagues and other networks. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for joining us today, and goodbye.